The year was 1977 when my family moved into the old renovated funeral home. My father, a maintenance foreman, found the place cheap a way for us to live in a spacious home with a good piece of land. At the time, we had no idea that this house, with its creaky floorboards and dim-lit rooms, would haunt us for years to come. We lived there for 13 years. 13 long, unrelenting years until the storm of 1990 changed everything. It wasn't until the accident during that storm that my father decided it was time to leave. But by then we were too deep in the grip of the house's strange hold. It had watched us for all those years, and its whispers had seeped into our lives in the ways none of us could fully understand. I kept a journal throughout those years, one I'd later return to after years of therapy and introspection. At first it was filled with mundane things, school friends, family life. But as I grew older, it became an account of the unexplainable, the eerie happenings that no one else seemed to notice. I became obsessed with documenting everything. I'll take you through the house room by room, starting with the entryway. The entryway was the first place that always felt wrong. The interior door was made of old wood with glass panes that rattled whenever the wind picked up. It led to a stairwell that descended into the main floor of the house. My father always locked the door at night, a habit that felt like it meant more than just protecting us from the outside world. It was the only door in the house that was always locked when we went to bed, but often my father would find it slightly ajar in the morning. Sometimes it would even be wide open. My mother would say I was imagining things, or maybe it was the wind, but I knew it wasn't the wind. The latching mechanism on the door made a loud click when it was engaged, and on more than one occasion I'd hear that click in the middle of the night. It was as if something had been coming and going through that door while we slept. Then there were the cold spots. The house was old, so we often attributed them to the old steam radiator heaters that ran through the walls. But these weren't just places where the air felt cooler. They felt like an icy hand resting against your skin, sending chills down your spine for no reason at all. The cold would be gone as quickly as it came, but that didn't make it any less unnerving. The bathroom was always the worst place. It had an old mirror that stretched across most of the back of the door. When you closed the door, the mirror would reflect the hallway behind you, but the worst part was that sometimes the reflection didn't match what was in the hallway. It would show something else, a shadow, a movement, something out of place. We never entered the bathroom in the dark after that. I still remember one night during a particularly bad storm in 1990, I'd just finished brushing my teeth when I felt something in the reflection, something that wasn't in the hallway. I turned around to check, but there was nothing there. I'd always believed my father when he said it was just my imagination, but that night something inside me knew it wasn't. A feeling of nausea gripped me every time I walked into the bathroom. After that, I couldn't even bear the thought of touching the mirror, let alone breaking it. Though part of me wanted to. Something about the mirror made me feel like if I disturbed it, something would come through. Something that had been waiting all along. The kitchen wasn't much better. There were the usual old house noises, the creaking of floorboards, the strange sounds from the pipes. But then there was the kitchen itself. The cabinets would open and close by themselves, the bell of the toaster would ring when it wasn't plugged in, and the kitchen light would flicker on and off at night. It didn't make any sense, but it was just one more thing to add to the growing list of oddities that filled the house. At night, the main light over the dining room table would turn on dimly glowing, a deep, unsettling red. I'm not talking about a faint red. It was the kind of red you see when the bulb is dying, but it was bright enough to make the room feel wrong. Sometimes we'd hear the loud click of the old push-button switch being activated when no one was near it. The pantry, however, was the room that terrified me the most. It was small. A cramped walk-in closet that we kept our dried goods in. Every time I had to go in there, I felt like something was crawling over me, but when I looked, there was nothing. No bugs, no spiders, no rats, nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, watching, waiting. I remember the night I was sent to fetch something from the pantry. I couldn't find the light cord, and as I fumbled around in the dark, something brushed against my hand. I jumped back, heart pounding in my chest. I closed the door as quickly as I could and told my mother, but she just brushed it off, telling me it was my imagination. But I knew something was in there. Then there was the attic. The former funeral director had turned it into a sort of lounge with a full bar and a billiard table. It was one of the strangest things in the house, a place of leisure in a building that was once used for mourning. My father always claimed that the attic was one of the coolest parts of the house, but I didn't like it. There was something about the narrow staircase leading up to it, something about the dark, cramped space that made my skin crawl. I remember one night sitting alone on the couch in the living room, hearing the sound of the old pinball machine. The chug chunk of the flippers, the sound of the ball rolling, even though the game wasn't plugged in. It was the same with the electronic bowling game. Sometimes the ball would roll around the room and you'd hear the music play. Ride of the Valkyrie, playing at strange intervals out of sync with time. I know this is just the beginning. The house kept its secrets for years, revealing just enough to keep us on edge. And though we left in 1990 after the storm, the memories never left me. They've stayed with me, and as I sit here today, writing down everything that happened, I realize something: that house wasn't just a home. It was something alive. It had a presence and awareness of us. And I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching, waiting for the next person to cross its threshold. As the years went on, the unease in the house only grew. Each room seemed to have its own presence, its own unsettling energy. It wasn't just the creaks and groans of an old building. It was something else, something that didn't belong. I started noticing things that others didn't. My parents, despite being aware of the odd occurrences, never seemed to be as bothered by them as I was. I could tell they were just trying to make sense of it all, but there were times when I'd catch them looking over their shoulders, glancing nervously toward a door or window as if expecting something to appear. I knew the house had a strange effect on them too, but it was subtle, more like a gnawing feeling at the back of their minds that they couldn't fully explain. I remember how my dad would always check the locks on the doors before bed, always making sure the basement door was padlocked. It was as though he knew something could come through at any moment. That was the thing about the house. It felt like there was always something waiting just out of sight, just beyond the edge of your vision, ready to step into the light when you weren't paying attention. I started to feel like the house was alive, like it was aware of us. The more I observed, the more certain I became that whatever it was, it had been there long before we ever moved in, and it didn't want us to leave. Even the simplest things, like walking through the hallway at night, became an ordeal. The shadows in the corners of rooms seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the feeling of being watched never faded. It was always there, lurking in the background, just out of reach. It made my skin crawl. I started having nightmares in them. I was trapped in the house, unable to escape. The walls closed and the shadows became solid, and the house itself seemed to breathe as if it was alive and pulling me deeper into its grasp. And the noises, the scratching, the whispers, they were everywhere. It started as subtle, fleeting sounds, things I could almost convince myself were just the house settling or the wind, but over time they became more distinct, more insistent. At night I would lie in bed pretending to sleep as I heard the soft scrape of nails on wood, the tapping of something unseen. And then there were the footsteps, heavy dragging footsteps that would come from the attic or the basement, moving slowly through the house. The odd thing was that they never sounded like human footsteps. They were more like something else, something not quite right, and I wasn't the only one who heard them. My mother would sometimes mention the sounds in passing, as if she were trying to convince herself that they weren't anything to worry about. But I could see the fear in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. She was just as terrified as I was, but she didn't want to admit it. The house had a way of making you doubt yourself, making you question what was real and what wasn't. After all, it wasn't just the noises, it was the feelings, the suffocating heaviness that seemed to hang in the air, the way the rooms felt colder than they should be. And then there were the things that happened when we weren't even home. The kitchen cabinets that would open and shut on their own, the toys that would be found scattered on the floor in the morning, even though no one had touched them the night before. Sometimes the toys would even move. It wasn't just that they had been knocked over. It was as if they had been deliberately placed in different spots when we weren't looking. It was impossible to explain, but there it was. The house was changing things. I began to dread the times when I would have to be alone in the house. Every time I was left behind, I felt the pressure of the house's gaze. Even my hamster seemed to sense it. There were nights when she would freeze in her cage staring at the corners of my room, her little eyes wide with fear, and I knew that whatever was in the house, she could see it too. But no one else ever seemed to notice. My friends wouldn't come over. No one would stay the night. I remember one of them telling me once in a hushed voice that the house creeped them out. They wouldn't go near the front door, let alone step inside. I couldn't blame them. By then, I had stopped trying to explain things to people who would believe me. How could I convince anyone that something was in that house, something that wasn't human? I didn't even understand it myself. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it intensified. There was one night when it all seemed to come to a head. I had been in the living room alone watching TV when I heard a soft thud from above. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but then it came again louder this time. And then the footsteps. They were moving across the attic floor slow, dragging as if something or someone was shuffling around up there. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the ceiling, praying it would stop. But it didn't. The footsteps continued, and I could hear a faint rasping breath as though something was struggling to draw air into its lungs. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran out of the room, heart racing, and told my parents what I had heard. They looked at each other, their faces pale. "It's just the wind," my father said, but there was no conviction in his voice. That night I didn't sleep. The footsteps continued all through the night, and when the storm hit the next day, it felt like the house itself was roaring in response. As time wore on, the house's presence became harder to ignore. The strange occurrences that had once been isolated incidents began to blur together, becoming a constant undercurrent to our daily lives. It wasn't just the noises anymore. It was the overwhelming feeling that something was always there, watching, waiting, the strange shadows, the whispers that came from nowhere, the objects that would be out of place every time we returned home. All of it pointed to something far more sinister than we could have ever imagined. I began to lose track of time, wondering if the house was playing tricks on me or if I was just losing my grip on reality. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with the distinct sense that something was in my room, standing at the foot of my bed. The feeling would be so intense I could almost feel the weight of someone's gaze. Yet when I turned on the light, the room would be empty. The fear became a constant companion. My parents, though they tried to reassure me, were becoming more and more distant. They didn't talk about the house the way they used to, and when they did, it was always with a quiet unease. My father, ever the skeptic, would sometimes try to explain the strange occurrences away, drafts, old pipes, the house settling, but his explanations were growing thinner, and I could see the worry in his eyes. It was as though the house had a way of twisting their perceptions, making them doubt their own experiences. The thing that scared me the most was the feeling that we were being herded through our own home. It was like the house was slowly but surely pushing us towards something, toward a moment that would reveal itself only when it was ready. It wasn't just the noises or the shadows, it was the temperature, the cold spots that moved through the house, creeping up on you when you least expected it. One moment you'd be in a warm room, the next you'd find yourself shivering as though you'd walked into an open freezer. The chill would settle in your bones, leaving you with a deep sense of foreboding, as if something was coming closer. I started to notice it more often, especially in the areas of the house that felt the most wrong: the basement, the pantry, the attic. These were the places where the cold was most intense, and I could feel the presence most strongly. I hated the basement. I would avoid going down there at all costs. But sometimes my father would ask me to help him bring up tools or put something away. Every time I would feel the creeping sensation of being followed, of something lurking just out of sight, waiting to close in. The smell of old moss and the pungent scent of metal hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The more I went down there, the more the feeling of dread grew. I hated the storage room by the stairs, the one that was always dark, no matter how much light you tried to shine into it. It felt like the very air in that room was wrong, heavy and oppressive. And every time I walked past it, I felt like something was watching me, waiting for the moment when I'd slip up and get too close. I never went near the basement door without making sure it was locked behind me. But then one evening, as I was helping my father with the lawnmower, something changed. We were putting away the tools in the basement when I saw it. Something moved along the tool wall, just out of the corner of my eye. It was quick, like a shadow, but it was there. I didn't want to tell my father, but I couldn't help it. He saw it too. He didn't mention it, but I knew he had seen something. He tried to laugh it off, saying it was just the house settling again, but we both knew it wasn't. It wasn't the house, it was something else. It was during that time that I started keeping a journal. I wasn't sure what else to do, but writing helped me make sense of the madness around me.